Hi, everybody. This is session 4, Mentoring Support Program. Some of you may have skipped sessions 2 and 3. I don't blame you. How much time you got in your life? But this one is about the mentoring agreement specifically, and some of you will be starting to do these things now. So hopefully this will be some value to you. So the aims of the presentation again, a little bit clearer understanding of the curriculum of the program in particular, and you'd be prepared to complete your contract with your apprentice. Be prepared to develop learning opportunities to co-produce a successful mentoring agreement with your apprentice. So like as we had in previous sessions, it's the team around the apprentice. All these various folk are involved in various different ways. I've gone through them before. I don't intend to go through them now. But of course, if there's anything you're unclear about in any of these sessions or any of these slides, you can always stop and have a little read. But I'm moving on. So what is a curriculum? So, there's stuff to be taught and to be learned, and that's what a curriculum is. The subjects studied in school, college, etc., and what each subject includes. It's as simple as that. So you need to know a little bit about the curriculum for year 1 and assessment points. A lot of this stuff, of course, you'll have done in your own social work training, but it may be for some of you, like, for example, for me, that will be in the last century, and things have probably moved on a little bit since then. Some of you may be much more familiar with the kind of things that are involved in social work education now. And we, of course, are trying to do a slightly different thing, even though many of the themes are the same with the apprenticeship course. We'll talk about the standards. You don't have to know these off by heart, but you do have to know what they are. And a little bit about engaged pedagogy and the kind of thing that influence the teaching staff in particular on the course. In how they approach things. So these are the modules. In most years, apprentices have 4 modules, and apart from the final year when they have 3. And this is how year 1 is set out. So the first one is about transitions into social work, and they do have a 2-week block teaching period from the 18th of September. Kind of really this module is acknowledgement that they are making a major transition in their life, a professional and personal transition. And the first assignment we asked them to do is just 500 words, but we asked them to talk about that, talk about their journey into social work, what motivated them, how did they get to be where they are now today. And then afterwards, we asked them to do a process recording. We actually asked them quite often in the program to go out and look at things that actually happen in the real world rather than just kind of approach things entirely theoretically. And in this instance, we do a process recording, which is due on the 13th of November. So they've got quite a little bit to do in the first few months. And occasionally they might feel a little bit overwhelmed, but they generally all manage. Then we do foundational skills and knowledge, and a lot of that is about human growth and development and things of that nature. You see it'll start off in October. Again, observations, but slightly different observation. This time we asked them to tie it into research models, things of that nature, theories about human development, and so on. Obviously, they're going to have to know about law, policy, and ethics. For that module, which will start in the new year, there is an online MCQ test, which generally fills people with fear, but they generally all pass. And then they have to do a presentation on a legal or ethical debate. And of course, social worker has no shortage of those. On-the-job learning, which is what you are involved in, takes place across the whole year. They have a portfolio to complete. You'll hear a lot more about that later on, but it has the kind of things you might expect: direct observations, the mentoring agreement, feedback from people with lived experience, and some critical reflections and so on. They also, at the very end of the year, have a Viva, which is essentially a presentation about their progress over the past, I suppose, really it's about 8-9 months. And again, you'll hear more about that in due course. So now, right now, presuming that you're watching this at the start of September or thereabouts, from around the 18th December, start to kind of either arrange or have the first meeting to talk about the mentoring agreement and the first tripartite agreement. The tripartite agreement is something to do with APTEM and our monitoring systems, and I'm going to do a very short presentation just to tell you what that's about, but too much today to fit into this one thing. We just want to focus on the mentoring agreement. As I said earlier, 9th of October, the apprentice's journey into social work. And around that kind of time, the first mentoring agreement completed. So probably by the end of October, we'll be realistic to think when that will happen. In November, the first direct observation, and direct observations are just a standard issue essentially in social work education, no matter what kind of degree or course you are undertaking. It'll be the SRA who will do that. And of course, there will be feedback from PLE, and that will be uploaded on the 27th of November. You will be doing the second one, and we will be coming back to that with some kind of information for you. Some of you will be quite familiar with doing direct observations, so some of you not so much. On the 4th of December, they got a short assignment about agency description. Again, we will provide you with a lot more detail about that, just really so you know. In fact, that piece is more got to do with the apprentices than you, but I think it'll be helpful that if you understood too what we're asking them to do. We expect ongoing supervision and formal and informal support, and really you probably see them quite frequently at this initial stage because there's a lot of things to do and to get used to. At the end of December, it's kind of around this time that we review the on-the-job learning and the index of evidence, also a separate session. And that review is uploaded on or around the 8th of January. So you have to kind of write it up, etc., etc. But again, we'll send you guidance on what's involved. Standards. Other relevant standards? Well, the standards in general. The apprenticeship standards, that's that little Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education is up there. You can follow the link if you wish. But really at this stage, everybody, including yourself, are probably just getting used to them because they're relatively new. And in fact, they have been updated last year. So when I say everybody, I mean me too. Do you know what I mean? There's also the PCF. The reason we place emphasis on the PCF essentially is that is the only professional standard. Well, I suppose in one way, for and by the profession, they used to say, but also it's the only standard that has levels of progression. That says this is what PCF 1 to 9 looks like at readiness for direct practice level, which is the level we are going to be at for the apprentices in their first year. This is what 5 looks like. This is what qualified social worker looks like, etc., and strategic and consultant, blah, 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 etc., etc. But the rest of the standards don't have that built into it. So from an educator's point of view, having standards that map progression is kind of really very useful and actually quite useful for the learners too, because perhaps it gives them a clearer idea of what they should be aiming for. Now, I'm not going to spend long on Social Work England standards. These are the professional standards. These are the education and training standards. We have to comply with them as a course. They come around and inspect us. You know all about inspections, but in any event, that's in the background. And they also have standards for practice-based learning, which is on-the-job learning in our language. So again, we have to take those things into account, and we do. So if we think back again a little bit about how learning is designed, adult learners, and so on, you have these kind of things we must think about. They're self-concept, they're more secure in themselves, but in actual fact, we're rattling that a little bit. We're kind of asking them to learn to be a different professional person, and that's quite a thing. But they have significant learning experiences, and we should draw on these. It kind of gives them confidence that they have come this far. They have this toolkit, this solid baseline to draw on. They're very much ready to learn because some of them have been waiting a long time for this opportunity. And when it's come, they are going to go for it. Do you know what I mean? But the learning has to be very practical. It's not a theoretical course, even though there's lots of theory in it. We're asking permanently that they apply theory to practice and practice to theory funnily enough, and that the two things are kind of feeding into each other across the boundaries of the university and the workplace. And of course, they have quite strong internal motivation and drive. So it's internal. But at times it takes, sometimes even a bit of courage to keep that going. And there are going to be moments when they kind of slip and slide a little bit. And our job collectively is to pick them up and support them to move on. Those four principles, again, I think we have said these and others, but adults are self-directed. We don't tell them, we give them guidance. So they have to have a genuine say in this process or else it doesn't work. They have experience to draw on, so they're adding to rather than starting from scratch, even though it doesn't always feel like that to them. They need practical learning focused on real world work issues and professional issues, and it should be centered on solving problems instead of memorizing content. So that's the general kind of adult learning. There are more up-to-date versions of this, and we could do that if we were in a different context or in a different course. So we like to think of ourselves as people involved in engaged pedagogy, and indeed student feedback seems to indicate that because they know that we listen to them in the various kind of channels or opportunities there are for that, and we act on what they say. So engaged pedagogy comes from the late Professor Bell Hooks. You can see it's Bell and Hooks with a small letter. That's her deliberate and particular choice. You could have a little think about why that might be. But if any of you were thinking, Dermot, you got a typo there. No, that was a deliberate thing on her part. She wrote that well-known book, Teaching to Transgress: Education as the Practice of Freedom. So it was a kind of a different thing, probably powerfully linked to people like Paulo Freire, people of that nature. So it's a kind of a slightly different approach in terms of being liberation education rather than banking education, to use the Freirean phraseology. So it's this notion that we're learning and teaching in an interconnected way. And Pasquarella and Terenzini kind of summed this up. The greater the student's involvement or engagement in academic work, the greater his or her level of knowledge acquisition and general cognitive development. The more the students are directly involved, and because we're in positions of power, the more that we deliberately enable that to happen, the more likely it is that we'll all learn. Kind of seems obvious, really, in a way. Maybe not so much. Anyway, what's contracting? Because really, the mentoring agreement is a contract. Might seem a bit of a kind of 180-degree turn after talking about engaged pedagogy, but we're doing that within kind of certain limitations, parameters that we need to abide by, including the need to get a degree. So a contract is simply an agreement that should be kept. It's often about an exchange of value. So sometimes it's about money, sometimes it's about values, but there's generally some sort of reciprocal thing going on. And of course, contract can be breached. What happens when we breach the spirit or the letter of the contract? Obviously, in the background, there are contracts between the employing agencies, your employer too, and the university, which are legally enforceable. Thankfully, that doesn't generally happen, but it is a contractual or legal background. We're legally obliged to deliver what we say we will. For example, there's legislation about that. So short of it is education, just like social work has a legal context. But there's also an ethical context. It's a mutual agreement to support and guide in professional development. You need to spend some time with your apprentice to kind of work on that relationship and think about, not what you will do, but how you're going to do it. And there needs to be a conversation and recording of similarities and differences. Now, I don't even like the phrase, some similar and different to what. So even the words, power and prejudice indeed is located in language, as is culture. These words all kind of have a subtext of some description. Sometimes the subtext is not so difficult to see, if you see what I mean. So we'll have to think carefully about this and how do we manage it. Meet the mentee before the start of the conversation or course, not before the conversation, before the course of practical, and think about what you need for the first review meeting. And we have a few suggestions about how you might approach this. So let's just look at the mentoring agreement, the actual document. We're going to do about half it here, half it in the next session. So there are obviously templates, surprise, surprise, but it's up to you to really make that thing real by a process of negotiation and discussion. We'll have a look at the early sections of the template and think about ways that you might actually make that live, you know. So it starts off with contact details, names and addresses, emails, phone numbers, all that kind of stuff. There's a section on roles and responsibilities, which detail the roles and responsibilities of all the different participants. Probably do well to have a little look at that. But the bit really interested in for this section is getting to know and understand each other. Invest in the learning and teaching relationship at an early stage and it'll go better, right? Kind of hark back to what Bell Hooks said later. Other sections of more detail later on, and we're going to introduce a few models, and we'll probably send you a little bit of kind of literature about that if you want. So models are never perfect. They're only as good as the way you use them and the intent with which you use them, but they help kind of structure conversations and learning, and that is their value. So the first is social graces. A lot of people will know this already. There seems to be a bit of vogue for systemic family therapy, and in particular around this model of the social graces. Lots more besides, of course. Now, you can actually get this. It's publicly available. Follow the link there. I think I will send it to you. It'd be a good idea to read the article because it'll give you a sense of how it is used to generate a conversation that you and the apprentice can explore these things about each other. Your kind of wonderfulness, essentially, isn't it? Really, that's perhaps a better way of framing the conversation. Because these things play out in power games, in the worst, and an acknowledgement and working with power at best, if you see what I mean. So you kind of do it consciously, and the conversation becomes somewhat different. So what elements of graces might be in play? And unless you kind of broaden out that conversation, really, it's kind of likely that you will forget some of these, and that some things will become prioritized and some things will become avoided. There's a later exercise we're going to give you as well to think about what things are being avoided in the conversation. But for now, perhaps just start off with this and might help you to think about assumptions you make about each other. What did you feel about having this conversation? What was visible, voiced, invisible, and unvoiced? Generally, this works very well for people in my experience. This is what people tell me. Do you know what I mean? And it's widely used all over the place. But there must be something going on here. I think it's a very useful model. I think it's extremely helpful. And maybe it talks about this because we all have elements or parts of ourselves that are both visible and invisible. So if I had, for example, a learning disability that might be invisible, might not be seen, it might be also unvoiced because I might not talk to you about that. Other aspects of who I am, you can see me. Not too sure if you can actually, but maybe you have seen me in other situations and you can tell I'm kind of pretty pink or white, as we generally call that. And I'm very voiced, am I not? Now, I'm being slightly flippant, and it's kind of not actually a very flippant conversation. This can be a really quite, actually quite deep conversation, and it needs to be given the time and respect it deserves to do that mutual exploration. And because some things are invisible and unvoiced, or a combination of those things, it may be quite uh, unexpected, in fact, elements of that conversation that come up. Here's another little model, the Mandela model, quite like this too. This is Prosper Teedham, well-known social work academic, particularly around practice education. And she was teaching on a course, and she kind of noticed, not only on her own course, but the research in general is saying that Black African students are a significant cohort entering the profession. I think that's kind of inarguable. Uh, but really, we're kind of struggling, and she was kind of working out. Okay, if students are struggling, and it would appear they're more likely not to progress through the course or not as well as they might do. Well, what's happening, and what should we do about it? So you have to admire somebody who not only identifies the problem but comes up with a way to deal with it. Um, she kind of thought, okay, we need a little bit more here, and she noticed that students were more likely to fail placements. There's broader research that indicates that's true, and we're experiencing homesickness. And I kind of think, well, our students, a lot of students, no, we're talking about something different here. And homesickness, if you have ever experienced it, is kind of a really it's kind of painful, really. That's not the short of it, you know. Nipped wings was the feeling that, I used to progress well. I did well in education. I did well in my last job, and now suddenly I feel constrained, and I feel like my ability to progress and be the person, the professional I can be, it's not happening for some reason. There was a lack of practice experience, and practice experience in the UK is very particular. Social work is done differently in all over the world, many, many different ways. And we've got a particular neoliberal kind of approach to it, which most people kind of go, I'm not bloody neoliberalism again. Don't be lecturing me about that. But we do. There are particular contexts, legal processes, and money, resources, etc. Very different contexts from social work, how it might be practiced in other places. Hmm. And of course, money is also an issue for the actual students who might be kind of having to do additional jobs in standard issue kind of BA MSW education. And on this occasion, of course, are employees, and they're trying to balance their studies, their home life, and work. But one of the things a lot of people were saying, and in fact, this is echoed in some interesting um, literature that Johan Hakak and colleagues had done recently. They were asking um, social workers from other jurisdictions about their experience. And there's quite a few of those articles. I advise you to go off and read them, really fascinating. But this view of the students that practice learning felt like another world. They were kind of going, what is going on here? What are the norms here? How should one behave? What am I expected to do? What is expected of me? And so it was kind of, there was a lot of learning having to be done about all of those things. So they developed the following tool to address these. I kind of say, if you like, take two of these categories when I move on to the next slide, and just pause the recording, talk about the categories for a minute or two, or not, as the case may be. You can do what you want. So this is what the model looks like. That you make time, first of all, right? It's not going to happen unless you do. That you acknowledge that there's some stuff going on here, and you're trying to kind of mutually understand what's happening. So you need time with that acknowledgement to kind of have a meaningful conversation. Then you talk about needs, differences, educational experiences and expectations, culture of education, um, life experiences, and a person's age, all of which might look kind of slightly different in the Mandela model, but you'll only know if you discover, explore, try it out. I have used this model myself a number of times. I find it very effective. But, there are other models available. We always have to think about what we are missing. So practice wisdom knows about the issues addressed, but it also needs to practice discipline. Social work is a discipline as much as anything else. What else might I be missing with my students? So perhaps we do have a responsibility to create new tools, new ways of working. The world doesn't stop. The world changes and mutates. Our student body does too. And we always need to be kind of keeping up to date, trying to understand and learn from our learners. So perhaps the apprenticeship offers us a really good opportunity to do that. The next three sections are all about learning needs. Now, I know we're going to move on, and a lot of people with this one straight straight into the learning needs. Let's get on with it. But like, I can't emphasize enough how important it will be that you spend time doing that, getting to know the apprentice. I put up a couple of models there. There are other ways. You may have things that you use yourself or that other people have used with you that are very effective. I'm not saying uh, use these models. A lot of people do, a lot of people don't, but just invest in the relationship, get to know each other. The next three are about identifying the apprentice's strengths. Then you move on to agreeing learning needs, and then you identify and write the learning opportunities. So that takes a little while. So rather than put everything into one session, we're going to come back to that on the next occasion. Eventually, we get to a point where we put it all together because it's like a kind of little planet with various kind of bodies circling and rotating and in orbit around the apprentice. But it does become a little bit clearer as we go on. So I look forward to seeing you in the next session. I think that'll do for me. And now I will attempt to turn off the recording and hopefully see you next time.